So, I was telling Justine that I had this little chat with the young man who will start his class tomorrow about, well, life also, precisely, and more specifically the concept of human life, as it is defined by Aristotle. You know, the idea that the human has no biologically determined kind of ethos, is not determined at all, and that instead of that, the human has to build the work of reason. So he will discuss that, which is very interesting, because I told him that we talked very much about his work, and I told him about the limit between the symbolic, the frontier between the symbolic and the biological. And he said that he was also working on that frontier, precisely in his seminar, which will start tomorrow. Like, is Aristotle right to define the human as a reasonable animal? And what is the work of reason? And shouldn't we talk, on the contrary, of an absence of work? You know, so, in fact, I think for those of you who will attend the seminar, there should be a kind of continuity, and I'm glad to hear that, because I think it will be more profitable for you, rather than perhaps approaching quite another topic. So I think this will be interesting. So is there anything you want me to? Yes?
I have several questions, so please feel free to disregard any that you wish.
Okay, I do.
First, on day one, you mentioned fascism as being the most dangerous form of government, I assume. I was wondering how you might define fascism. Do you believe that the Nazi regime was a fascist regime? What is your definition of democracy? In regards to the universal taboo of incest, are you aware of Romani gypsy culture? And lastly, is there a place for Blanchot in our discussion? We have a privilege of being introduced to Blanchot and
Yes.
Chris Finns in his workshop. And 2 points on Blanchot in literature and the right to death. There's a passage that goes, the meaning of speech then requires that before any word is spoken, there must be a sort of immense hecatone, a preliminary flood plunging all of creation into a total sea. And I wonder if there might be a sort of final sacrifice to be made, and what your thoughts are on that. And you also spoke of the neutral observer, and I wonder if there's a place for Blanchot in that respect.
Oh, thank you. Thank you very much. Regarding Nazism and fascism, you're quite right that I wasn't sharp enough on this, because there's of course a distinction between both. You know, the classical distinction is not Nazism introduces racism. It is a necessarily racist type of social organization and government, rather than, well, some people consider fascism to be possibly separated from racial theories. I don't know what this distinction is really. Is it really valid? I don't know, because it's very difficult for me to think of a kind of fascism which would be totally separated from racist theory. But this is what I would say. And clearly, Agamben in Homo Sacer talks about Nazism rather than fascism. So you're right to erase the issue. I should have been more rigorous and talk about Nazism only in that respect. My concept of democracy, I must say, that on that point, it is true that I would follow Agamben, which says that until we deconstruct the synthesis between bios and zoe, which has been made visible in Nazism, until we don't do that, then there will remain an element of totalitarianism within democracy. So I think that he's totally right to link the problem of democracy with the imperative of finding the bios of the zoe. So we would have to, it is our task, our responsibility, to invent, to create new forms of life, which, well, in fact, deconstruct sovereignty. But outside of that, I don't have any definition of democracy. I think it would be difficult to produce it like this. About the gypsies, I don't know. You know, it's being a big issue again in France at the moment, because the French government is doing exactly what Sarkozy used to do, like dismantlement of camps, etc., etc. So it's a big problem in my country. I don't know what you can say, if there's a solution to this, or again, if we don't have like Agamben to consider these people as the new homo sacri of our time. I don't know. And regarding Blanchot, I know that there is, and you're quite right that undoubtedly I think that Derrida's concept of the originary sacrifice is very much indebted to Blanchot, to this notion of originary hecatomb that you were just mentioning. And Foucault also refers to this fire, originary fire, which is the origin of language, and which destroys originally every presence. Now, for me, if I didn't talk about Blanchot, it's very interesting because just before I was here, I was in Canada and doing this seminar on Blanchot precisely, on the dialogue between Blanchot and Foucault. Foucault wrote the text called The Thought of Outside, and Blanchot replied in this text called Foucault as I Imagine Him. So it's a dialogue about the outside defined as neutrality. And for me, Blanchot is very interesting because the kind of language he speaks, this burned language, he's talking about this suspended language, this self-destructed I don't know. Yes, this burned language he's talking about is for me interesting because it is something different from poetry, as Derrida defines it. Remember this morning we said that perhaps poetry was the ultimate possible discourse on life. According to me, Blanchot is interesting because it's a mixture between poetry and something else, which is very close to Beckett and the people suffering from brain lesions, brain damaged people. So Blanchot is very interesting because for me it is the very expression of what I'm trying to define, which is the improbable limit between poetry and biology. So Blanchot is undoubtedly somebody who's very interesting for me because you can't tell when he writes or speaks, you can't tell which pertains to literature and what pertains to this kind of pathology, like this blind pathology. As I said, it's very close to Beckett and to what Deleuze called the exhausted, this kind of exhaustion of speech, of thought, which comes both from deconstruction and from the pathological state of the mind. But I didn't want to talk about that here because it would have forced me to go deeper into neurobiology. I will try tonight to talk about that, to talk about the absence of subjectivity. Okay? No, it's not really answers, but just a few elements.
You talked a bit about Deleuze the other day.
Yeah.
I don't have a specific question, but given that he is known to be a philosopher, or known as a philosopher that is a very materialist philosopher, where do you, I mean, you talked a bit about the body without organs, but where do you put him in the same bag, if I'm speaking very simple terms? Where do you put in the same bag as Agamben and Derrida and Foucault in this difficulty of getting rid of the symbolic and trying to root the symbolic in the biological? Okay,
so I will return the question to you and ask you. Can you explain to what extent Deleuze can be considered a materialist?
I will not answer this question, but
so see, it's not so obvious then.
Yeah.
It means that it's not so. Okay.
No, because you talked about the body without organs, and you give his. I totally agree with you. A ridiculous example of anorexia, but that's not his only example. It's a long time I haven't touched that text, but I remember that he tries to think the body without organs as a body that loses what I remember as the symbology of the organism, the symbology or the hierarchization of the body, and tries to think on bodies as flows of energy, as intensities, and so on.
Okay, and you call that materialist?
I agree with him. I think it's kind of the suspension of meaning. I've read it that way. He said, well, there's no more strata in his terminology, and no organization anymore. And so for me, there comes together the symbolic and the real. This kind of everything is contained in his body without organ. That's the way I read it. And then either you call it, well, you could call it the material, or maybe you call it the symbolic. But it comes together in my reading.
I can just add to this a little bit. As I mentioned, my first reading of that was precisely of the development, the undifferentiated state, as what I thought he was doing with the body without organs. So I wonder if it's looking at the same thing from another side, that I would have poorly probably argued that he was coming from the bottom up as opposed to the top down, adding the symbolic to it, but actually positing it from the beginning as well.
No, well, yes, I perfectly understand your resistance, because I wouldn't try even to reduce Deleuze to kind of symbolism, or it would be very unfair. And even what I said about Foucault and Agamben and Derrida is very, very unfair. So, and perhaps it is even more unfair in the case of Deleuze, because you're quite right. He's a great reader of Spinoza, of the Conatus. He's a reader of the body as the possible potentiality. You remember, the body is what a body can do. So it's very much about potentiality, possibility. And in that sense, the forces that are at play in the body are absolutely material forces. And you're right that his critique of the organism is a critique of idealism. It's a critique of a certain kind of traditional concept of organization that you can find in Hegel, for example, like this hierarchy, as you said, sovereignty of the organism, like of the head upon the rest of the body, etc. And it is also true that he talks about intensities and things like that, forces, and that he takes biology very much into account. I think he's the only one to talk about the brain, like 50 years before the others. You know, he's reading, I think it's Stephen Rose, that he quotes in What is Philosophy, or the last chapter, the conclusion of What is Philosophy is about the brain. I think he's one of the, only philosophers to to approach this question well before the others. He talks about the synapses. He says, oh, it's interesting because the nervous tissues are discontinuous. There are holes in them, synapses, etc. So it is true that in a way we might consider his discourse as something very close to, let's say, to plasticity, to the concept of the plasticity of life, which again, now we understand, is totally, would like to be totally materialist, a materialist concept. Well, I will tell you what embarrasses me the most, and perhaps we can start with this, okay? And then try to, because I don't have any text with me, so it's difficult. What my resistance, you know, this morning we were talking about negativity and self-contradiction of the real, etc. And I'm very, my form of, let's say, my spirit, let's call that way, is trained in contradiction. I don't think you can build any materialism outside contradiction, that is dialectics and or deconstruction as self-contradiction. And very clearly Deleuze says that very often, does not believe in negativity. If there is a concept which he really hates, and he talks in that terms, in affective terms, about dialectics. He says in the dialogue with Claire Parnet, there's one philosopher that I couldn't even ever read, which is Hegel. Who's Hegel? And because, you know, a difference for Deleuze can never become a contradiction. So it is something for him which is like the golden rule. The difference remains a difference. It never takes the form of a contradiction. This is a dialectical principle which for Deleuze is wrong. So differences remain differences, and there's no contradiction. So if you think of what a contradiction is for Hegel, for example, or for Derrida, it is something which is precisely immanent to the real. This is what I was trying to explain this morning. Contradiction is not something you bring from outside within the real. You know, you can think also of Marx talking about the way in which the real contradicts itself. It is the very logic of the real. So if you negate this kind of negativity, if you deny the contradictory essence of the real, then you have to explain why the real is in movement. Okay? And Deleuze is trying all the time, I think in all his work, to explain where does the movement come from, if it does not come from contradiction. Okay? It is very clear that for Hegel, Derrida, and all these thinkers, what keeps the real moving, you know, what keeps things in movement, the dynamics of life or existence or the real, etc., is this internal negativity. If you deny this as the motor, you know that Hegel defines negativity as the motor of the real, then you have to explain the origin of the movement. You have to invoke another cause for that. Okay? All right? And for Deleuze, it is true that this other cause is difference. It is difference in itself, for itself, which has this power of, let's say, displacing, moving, etc. But because a difference never comes to a contradiction, never forms a contradiction, okay? He has to explain how, again, a difference is able to move. What is the movement of the difference in Deleuze? So I think he tried, well, perhaps the clearest answer is in the moving image. When he talks about, as you know, cinema, it's the two volumes are about movement, the pure movement of the image of difference, And this, at this point, but we would need to read text, of course. But what I can say at the moment, it is that at this point, he has to refer to a non-immanent cause of movement, okay? To something which necessarily goes out of the immanence of the real, okay? He has to invoke a kind of non-internal, yes, let's call that immanent, reason of movement, okay? This total exteriority of the external character of movement, transcendent character of movement, okay? So what is it in Deleuze? Where does this movement, non-immanent movement, come from? And then I think he has this answer, which is repetition. Difference and repetition. I think the concept of repetition is very important. But for Deleuze, repetition is not a contradiction. Okay? And the movement of repetition explains that very, very well in Difference and Repetition. You know what he says? You know what he says. He said, what is repetition? Repetition is an idea. Okay? Remember this passage? Repetition can only be an idea, which means it is not immanent to the real. It is the real, it is the idea of the real. That is something which is external to the real, which is something which transcends in a way reality. The image of the real. No? For Derrida, sorry, image, idea are one and the same. And as you know, in Difference and Repetition, he talks about Plato. He talks very much about ideas in Kant and Plato, and we might be surprised to read such developments about ideas in a so-called materialist philosophy. It is because for him, the real is producing its own image. This is where difference comes from. It is as a mirror game. Okay? Real produces its own image, that is its own difference. Okay? But this production of difference as an idea, as an image, is not coming from an immanent contradiction to the real. You understand what I mean? So if you follow this, if you study this logic in Deleuze, you will see that there is a secret line between the real and its image, which the symbolic is reintroducing itself in the logic. You see what I mean? Because this image is not immanent to the real. It is the way in which the real repeats itself, reproduces itself, without negativity, without contradiction. And this produces a kind of displacement of image. I'm talking here at a very transcendental level, but this is also very present in Deleuze. So this production of the image, this cinematic production, is not dialectical, and in that sense it escapes. You know, it is a kind of an ecstasis of the real, kind of, you know. And it is a very moving line in Deleuze. You know, you can't really pinpoint it. It's not substantial. It's not essential, but it exists, and you find it everywhere. And the way he writes, again, I don't have text with him, but the way he writes, he says, when I say this, I don't say that. When I say becoming animal, I don't mean becoming an animal. And when I say, you know, like, he always says, it's a difference, it is not a contradiction. I say repetition as an affirmation and not repetition as negation. You know, this constant, I'm saying this and not that, I'm saying this and not that, is I'm talking about difference and not about dialectics. Well, we can reduce Deleuze to that. Difference and not contradiction. So this secret non-line, if you want, this secret non-thing is the very, you see what I mean? Okay? He has to refer to another kind of motor than the one of self-contradiction. And that's why everything he says on the body, and you're quite right, is, according to me, a bit too, it's too non-dialectical for me, I must say. You know, the introduction, the constant introduction of the ideal in the real, if you want. What he calls the idea, or the image. It's too bad we don't have the text on the brain. Precisely the last chapter of What is Philosophy on the Brain, which is, you know, incredibly, well, what he's describing is an image of the brain.
Is this the affect chapter?
It's about chaos.
Okay.
I don't know if you remember that. He says synapses are like chaos in the brain, etc. And in such a moment, it's very clear that we are deriving from the real to a kind of production of the image of the real. And this is when I, personally, but I may be wrong, but this is what, for me, this is a problem. For me, I'm saying.
Doesn't that kind of problem still come up when you think about even the plasticity of biology, in terms of it being this kind of difference? In many ways, I think it could be thought of as this difference in repetition precisely, that we don't know why it does this thing. We don't know why this interference RNA or this, whatever decides to express it this way or this way or this way. They don't know why, but it does. And it's sort of, from that basic level, it's great to have that materiality and to see that, yeah, we have evidence it does this, but what is it and what is this? I think it still escapes, doesn't it?
Yes, of course, it escapes, but it is true. You're right. I think that for a long time, that is the whole half of the 20th century, difference. And since Heidegger, I guess, was the first one to say that, difference appeared as the ultimate or most originary of all terms. Everything starts with a difference. Okay, this was the very discussion of Hegel. Heidegger comes into the scene, and he says that Nietzsche was the first one to introduce this notion of difference. I don't know where he sees that, but this is what he says, Heidegger. And Deleuze said the same thing. We don't have to start with contradiction, we have to start with difference. Difference is the first of all terms, okay? So the source, as we said this morning, is always different from itself. Difference is the very beginning of things, which means that things don't begin, or which means also what you said, that we can't explain or give the reason why things are what they are, because everything starts with a difference. So you had all these philosophies of difference, okay? Deleuze, Derrida, etc., Heidegger. So it is clear that plasticity is in a way an answer to that. And what I've learned from biology, that I was trying to explain yesterday, you remember when we talked about epigenetics, this notion of deprogramming, changing, and I wrote, it was the title of one of my books, like changing difference. That difference is certainly not the first term, that it can change, that perhaps there is something more originary than difference, okay? Which is perhaps not a substance or a full reason or whatever, or principle, but which is perhaps the capacity of difference to erase itself and to give way to another kind of origin. Perhaps, after all, we have to deconstruct the notion of difference itself, because this is what we have to do. After all, we don't have to take for granted that anything should be the origin. So perhaps difference itself has to be deconstructed and reveal its capacity to change, like epigenetics reveals the capacity for the genome to be changed in a certain way. And what I call plasticity is the capacity of the origin to transform itself, to change form. So perhaps difference is not originary, there's something more originary than that, which is difference's own ability to change form, to transform itself. Okay? So now I don't want to, I'm not convinced by everything starts by a difference or with a difference. Difference itself can disappear. transform itself, have another form. Okay? This is the plasticity of difference. So it doesn't explain anything. It doesn't give you the reason why things are what they are. But perhaps difference is not the ultimate principle of explanation.
When we talked about biopolitics, we mentioned that it started around the 17th, 18th century, which
Yes.
coincides also with the rise of dissensual politics, for to use Rancière's term, of politics. And so I'm curious if we could explore the idea of the Zoe Bios distinction as really being connected to dissensual politics, and if we do transcend or go beyond dissensual politics and we end this distinction, then do we then end up in consensual politics? If you thought perhaps that was the way in which we would progress.
Why would that be? Why the fact of taking life into account would lead necessarily to consensus?
Well, when we talked about
Yeah.
Homo Saucer, we mentioned that this distinction of Bios and Zoe creates a pocket of society that is sort of exists outside, that are excluded and are not
Yes.
contained within society. This killable yet not
Yes.
sacrificable
Okay.
existence. And that does very much relate to, I say, dissensual politics, because there's a society where we're able to not include within the center of politics, the center of society, these people that are outside. And if we are then able to include them within and not have something on the outside.
Yes. Okay. Yeah, this is very interesting, but I think you have two kinds of inclusions. I think there's a form of consensus or inclusion which is very dangerous. Okay? Like, it is not so much about stopping to exclude people. It is also to ask what kind of inclusion we have to achieve. Because it can be, the totality can be precisely fascist as a way of imposing a form, a single form for everybody. And if we think of an inclusion as this, as the imposing of a single form, like globalization or whatever, I don't think this is what we have to do. We have to think of an inclusion which at the same time allows resistance to itself. Okay? So again, that would be a kind of dialectical form of inclusion. And again, this refers perhaps to the difference we can make between flexibility and plasticity, like a totality which is flexible, in which all the elements are flexible, is a form of fascist kind of inclusion, as opposed to a totality in which each element can resist the totality itself. You see what I mean? So it's not a new form of exclusion, but it is resistance or freedom within the totality. So I don't know if the term consensual or consensus is really right. I don't know if it makes me think of Habermas. Like, this communication, consensual. I don't know if this is what we're looking for.
Well, I wasn't trying to go to Habermas.
No, but consensus for me resonates in the Habermasian. I don't think we have to agree on everything. I don't think that the contrary of exclusion. I don't know if it's the consensus which is, the opposite form. Perhaps.
So you see democracy as the ultimate form of politics in that regard?
Oh yes, definitely. Yeah. Yes, but democracy understood as a kind of plastic totality. Okay. And I wouldn't use the term consensus.
Well, democracy would then be dissensual.
Yes. Yeah. Yes. Absolutely. Dissensus. Yes, but without exclusion.
So when would you have self-exclusion then, the ability to exclude yourself as a opposition to the totality?
Let's say, perhaps not exclusion, but, and this refers to Blanchot also, a kind of withdrawal, kind of withdrawing rather than exclusion. I think it's different, okay? I think Blanchot wouldn't have said, I'm excluding myself from society, but I'm withdrawing, which is not exactly the same thing. Sorry? Le retrait, yes, withdrawal, retreat, rather than exclusion, which supposes, first of all, that there is an outside, and which also implies a kind of violence that you don't necessarily have in withdrawing. Yes, the right to seclusion rather than exclusion. Okay? I think that there's no freedom without that. We should have a right to withdraw. But to be excluded is, I think, a bit different. So yes, thank you for this question. I think it's important to...
I wanted to ask you a question about deconstruction. And you were saying, I believe it was yesterday, you were describing it as a movement of the real. That kind of is this sort of auto-deconstruction or self-deconstruction of the real. And then you also said something that I thought was rather nice about plasticity not really being your philosophy, but being a moment that you've grasped.
Yeah.
And so I was wondering if there's a way in which we could think of deconstruction as almost, the act of writing deconstruction as an opposite movement of finding something to grasp and to hold on to stand on while watching the real deconstruct itself and sort of finding something solid just for a moment to sort of watch and describe this process.
Yes. Are you asking if we should do that?
No, if we can describe it that way, maybe in your understanding of deconstruction.
Normally, there shouldn't be such a stable point. If we are in deconstruction, then it means that there is no standpoint, no platform, deck of observation or whatever. Okay, but it's very interesting because I think that nevertheless, this is what Derrida experienced. Well, it is the very contradiction of deconstruction that at some point, I don't know if you know that, but it started in the 90s. Derrida started to talk about the undeconstructible. Justice, democracy, precisely. He says there are some values which seem to be indeconstructible. Justice, democracy, and precisely the messianism, the something to come, etc. Says, well, I'm discovering after my own trajectory of deconstruction, that deconstruction means that nothing is stable, and that everything can be inverted, contradicted, etc. And says, I must admit, in the end, that there seem to be some, let's say, values, which are not deconstructible. For example, democracy and justice, etc. And for me, it marked the moment where I wasn't able to follow deconstruction anymore, because I had the feeling of a great contradiction, a non-deconstructed contradiction. I said, no, all that, all this trajectory to end up in the undeconstructible, this is not possible. And I think this is precisely what you said. That he said, in the end, we need a kind of standing, like an undeconstructible soil from which we can go on deconstructing. And I don't believe in that. I don't think democracy is undeconstructible. We can say it is a necessary, at the moment, it seems to be the most necessary form, the most acceptable form of government, but I don't think that justice is undeconstructible. Okay? I don't think that messianism is undeconstructible. So no, I think if we want to remain within deconstruction, which I want to do, because for me, to do philosophy is to refuse any kind of stability, okay? Is to interrogate everything. In a way, it is very close to sophistic, or okay?
I didn't mean to suggest that it would be something that was undeconstructible, but just something like plasticity that we could stand on.
Yes, but if you so then let's say that it is a tentative stone in the river. Okay, it's a transient moment, it is precisely not undeconstructible. Okay? This is what I wanted to oppose. Okay, we need to walk on a soil anyway. You know, we need to cross the river, so we need stones for that, of course. Otherwise we drown. But these stones are absolutely movable, and they can collapse and they can disappear. And plasticity is absolutely not undeconstructible. Okay, it will disappear. It is a momentary. You see what I mean?
Yeah.
Okay. It is just well, how would we call it?
Well, this relates in a way to an aspect of your work that I don't know, for those who aren't familiar with your work, maybe hasn't come out in class regarding your use of the word plastic, and in particular in relation to plasticage. I mean, this is something that I don't know if that has come out, or if the explosive possibility that the really deadly destructive potentiality of
thank you
plasticity has really been extrapolated or explicated.
No, I didn't. You're right. I didn't mention that here. The synonymy between plasticity as the construction of form, sculpture, etc. The emergence of form, the sculpting is the end. The destructive aspect, like in plasticage, plastic bombing. For me, the concept of plasticity is absolutely dialectical to the extent that the positive meaning coincides with the negative one. So it is a self-explosive concept, which will, in the end, destroy itself. And I don't expect it to be. Well, I don't expect anything from it. Okay? And if everything disappears, that's fine. I mean, my work, you know, it will just have been. I was looking for the word, like a site, the place of observation. You know, a momentary, temporary rock. Otherwise, you are forced to stabilize this rock, to transform it into something which is undeconstructible and undestructible. And for me, this is not acceptable. Which doesn't mean that that there are no values. You know, people sometimes don't understand that and say, oh, then there is nothing stable. There is no truth. This is not the case at all. But I think that truth is dialectical. Truth is a movement. It is not something stable. It is a becoming. It is something which constantly deconstructs itself, destabilizes itself. It can't be something like, dogmatic. But yes, you're right, and thank you for reminding us of this double meaning of the plasticity. Yes?
I'm just wondering if you could briefly comment on any areas of connection or disconnect between your thinking of plasticity and Badiou's thinking change or the event.
No, I wouldn't be able to do that because I don't know. I'm not familiar enough with that. But perhaps you can tell me about it. I'm not enough. Do you see any connections?
I did. It went away. I did just have a thought. I'll get back to you.
But it was also like the movement upwards from like the thing to being.
What does it say about change?
Would you think that it goes like there's three steps, like from being to object to thing, and that change, like the experiential change or happens at the level of the thing, but then there's two types of change, regular change, and then what's the other? Singular.
Yeah, but I don't know what that means.
Anyway,
so
but the
it
thing that
difficult
goes
for me to.
upwards from like the infinitesimal, that would be maybe my personality and like a brute level, like from the smallest, thing.
larger,
So in a sense, like the RNA type of thing, like one displacement or one movement within a set.
Yeah, okay. In that sense, yes, I think there is a proximity. Like, if the rock is, the little stone is destabilized, then you can, it provokes a general change. Yeah, in that sense, yes.
Well, and I think fundamentally the concept of set as this multiplicity or multiplicity of multiplicities in a world that seems to be continual, thinking plasticity in that kind of way, again, which I still find kind of a weaving with Deleuze, which I think you would definitely disagree with, but it seems to keep coming back, of that kind of repetition with difference, and how to think identity between how to think different kinds of identity. So this regular change as identity with sort of within a world that doesn't introduce new possibility, that it doesn't do something novel, where the singular change is sort of between worlds or between multiplicities, so that you have this new kind of difference, this new possibility, this new plasticity. And I can kind of imagine that there might be some places where there could be some...
Yeah, I understand, yes, and then the question becomes, what is the difference between, let's say, a change which is a real evolution or transformation, and a change which is just another aspect of repetition?
For him, the regular change operates under the laws of that world, or the laws of the state of the situation. Nothing has really changed. There's no, what would, I guess kind of no infinity, you could say. Like nothing, it doesn't sort of account for that spontaneous, wow, how did the brain do that? Like if I can kind of jump between his thinking and your thinking, that would account for that completely spontaneous new thing that we can retrain or undo a gene or redo something else.
Yeah, I will think about it. I will try to get more familiar with that. It's a bit difficult for me because
I have a question that might sound terrible, but okay. Can we say that only in extreme cases one is able to size or to define? And I'm using, for example, if I take, third world countries and so on, would that mean that, in relation to the way their life and the past and so on, it's not that extreme, but it is extreme? Can you think that the structure is sort of, you can see how almost the symbolic works, as compared to this sort of minimum that is not being provided?
Well, no, but I don't understand the question. You're talking about third world?
Yeah, countries.
Countries, and the symbolic would be...
That is the structure that is at work, whatever it is, would be sort of more visible because we're in a way closer to their life, to, the sort of a sort of making us
Well, I don't think so. No. I think that their life is of course very linked with poverty and at the same time, I'm sure that for Agamben, for example, it's not the same thing. It's not the same thing.
Can you say what is different?
It's very interesting. What is the difference between poverty and first of all, I don't think that in third world societies the symbolic would be more or less apparent than in other countries. I don't see why it should be, that, well, Agamben's concept of bare life, perhaps there are others, possible others, but Agamben's concept of bare life, as we were saying yesterday, is very close to Heidegger's Dasein. And you know what Heidegger says about Dasein is that Dasein is a neutral term, and we have also to understand naked life as a neutral term, which means that it does not bear any determination of race, ethnicity, economy, level of wealth, or it's absolutely neutral. It means that it neutralizes all differences. Okay, so I would say it seems to me that poverty would be only a determination of naked life, but not naked. It wouldn't be naked life or bare life itself, as bare life itself is something that all Dasein have in common, without any specific, particular determinations. So it wouldn't be more visible here or there. I think this is what perhaps Agamben would say. I don't know what you think. You don't seem to be convinced. I don't see.
I don't know.
No, I don't know either. But I think that if we follow him, and in the end, when he says that Dasein and naked life or bare life are identical in their structure, because we were talking about the structure, then we have to understand naked life or bare life as something absolutely neutral, that is without any specific particularities or characteristics. And then poverty would be something derived from naked life, but not the essence of bare life itself. It would be an attribute to it. A kind of already qualified life.
Because Agamben's notion of bare life is intractably related to the camp, to the nomos of the real.
Yeah.
I mean, this is why I've always had suspicion that at an ontological level, I'm not convinced that anything like bare life exists.
Yeah.
Period. And I don't know, it's too quick, you'd have to prove something like that, but.
Yes, perhaps it doesn't exist. Perhaps this neutral form of life perhaps does not exist, and perhaps you can't really separate it from poverty, etc. And perhaps economical situations are more able to give us access to materiality of life. And perhaps you're right. I don't know if the concept of bare life is, in the end, satisfactory. But I think that for Agamben it wouldn't equate poverty or any kind of specific determinations. But you're right, does it exist? I don't know.
I'm going back a bit, but can you project, because you say that you're a dialectical thinker, and therefore the difficulty with the Deleuze, but then biology comes in and deconstructs a lot of what contemporary philosophy or philosophy has done for you, but then I think the question is, why do you hold on to dialectics? Can you project dialectics into epigenetics? Or what is it in the structure of epigenetics? Is there something dialectical about it?
I'm interested in what Hegel is my ultimate reference, and I think what be the case until the end. Not that Hegel would be this stable stone, because my Hegel is a bit stumbling. It's not really stable, but still, that. But we didn't have time to talk about this in the seminar. But his definition of life is that there are not two lives, but three necessarily, and it forms this system, which is logic, nature, spirit. For Hegel, the system is a triple structure. So you have three forms of life which are absolutely at the same level. One is not superior to the other, And as you know, he wrote philosophy of nature, well, science of logic, philosophy of nature, philosophy of spirit. Because for him, these three parts of the system, those three structures, are the three elementary forms of life. You cannot have one without the other. Which means that what happens in nature, and nature includes biology, of course, has a necessary echo in the life of spirit, and that the life of spirit has a necessary reflection and echo in what Hegel calls the logic, which could be defined today as the machine or the mechanical. What Hegel describes as the science of logic is the kind of it's a big, like, motor. So the technological cybernetic, he, of course, didn't know the term when he wrote, but it's very clear that for Hegel, life has these three triple dimensions of the natural, the spiritual, and the mechanical. So in that sense, what happens in biology today, like epigenetics, is a kind of self-dialectical relationship between biology and itself. Right? I presume that this is what Hegel would have said. That in fact, what happens with the introduction of, well, the discovery of epigenetics within genetics is a self-contradiction, is biology's self-contradiction. Because it is a very, as I said yesterday, contradictory line of thought. You know, there are two sides now in biology: the scientists who defend the idea of a genetically determined kind of life, and people like Georg Wilhelm or others who worked in epigenetics. So it is clear that we're facing today, and what interests me is this dialectical relationship of biology with itself. Yeah? Biology becomes a conflictual field. Okay? And this, if Hegel is right to say that when a contradiction appears in one form of life, it immediately reflects itself in the two others, then, you know, plasticity is just the reflection of this biological thing within the spiritual, and has also a translation in the logic, etc. See what I mean?
Yeah, but sorry, but I was not clear. My question is more: do you project dialectics not in the field of biology, but on the relation between the RNA and the DNA, for example?
Yes, this is what I was trying to say. That is a contradiction. Hegel would have said it is a contradiction within materiality, between the RNA and the DNA. You know, people laugh at Hegel because Hegel says that everything is dialectical. A fish is a dialectical system, etc. etc. There are incredible passages in the philosophy of nature about stones, about the sky, about stars, which each of them being a self-contradiction in a way. You know? It's very interesting to read the philosophy of nature. Just crystals, etc., etc., contradicting themselves, and nature being a series of contradictions. So yes, he would say that between the DNA and the RNA, there's a dialectical relation. And of course, this can be seen as ridiculous in a way. Or we can take that on the contrary very seriously and see that what happens at the level of the biological has in fact a translation at the spiritual and logical level. You see what I mean? This is how Hegel reasons all the time. So he locates contradictions, what he calls contradictions in the real, which themselves are reflections of spiritual contradictions, and then he shows how that works at the three levels. It's fascinating. So this is precisely what the philosophies of difference wanted to break with. You know, say, I remember this discussion with Brassier at some point, who said to me, how can you call that a contradiction within the real? He was absolutely angry because he found that totally idealist, and he said, what? How can you introduce Hegel at the level of contemporary biology? And I understand that. I understand that you can resist such an approach. This is the way well, you know, you have to follow what the person or the thinker or whatever, or the doctrine, who opens a space, I mean, for you. Whatever opens a path, follow it. If it is Hegel, then follow him. No problem. Whatever opens a way, go. Yes.
I got to remind you to say something about Spinoza.
As Spinoza. Yes, you're right. So, Spinoza is interesting because, as you know, he negates the dualism between the body and the mind, and he opposes Descartes very strongly on that point. So he says we are one mode of the substance. Finite creatures are modes of the substance, of the infinite substance. And these modes are made of thought and extension, mind and space, body and mind, and both of them are two aspects of the same thing, because the substance has two attributes, thought and extension. So because we are finite, we're not able to really produce the unity of both, but what we know is that both are the same aspect of the same thing. So our mind and our body express themselves. I know that Deleuze wrote his Ph.D. on expression in Spinoza. The body is expressing the mind and the mind is expressing the body, and both are two aspects of the same thing. So it is not true, as Descartes maintains, that the body and the mind are two separate, totally different substances, which would be united by a third substance. Okay? So there is a strict parallel or expression, as Deleuze would put it, between the movement of thought by idea as affirmation. You know, that one of the fundamental idea of Spinoza is that understanding and willing are one and the same. When I think of something, I want it. So every thought, every particular form of reasoning or of thinking is at the same time an affirmation. I want what I think what I want. So there's a kind of reciprocality between thinking and willing. And this is also totally different from Descartes. Okay? So this is what fascinates Deleuze and Spinoza, is that every idea is an affirmation. In that sense, also Nietzsche is very fascinated by Spinoza. Okay? So every time I say something, every time I think of something, I affirm it. Okay? So this, because the body and the mind are one and the same, this similarity between mind and will in the domain of thought is expressed in the body by the conatus. Okay? To be alive for the body is to affirm itself as an existence. Okay? The body wants to persist, to endeavor, Spinoza says, in its own being. And this endeavor is the translation of the identity between mind and will. Okay? So there's a strict echo between affirmation of thought and affirmation of the body, will and conatus. Yes, this is what is fascinating in Spinoza. This is the overcoming of any kind of dualism. Life is affirmation of itself at the two levels of mind and the body. Okay? And this is why Damasio, in his book Looking for Spinoza, we were mentioning it the other day, he says, Damasio says, Spinoza was the first neurophilosopher, proto-neurobiologist, because he discovered the mechanism of mapping, neural mapping, the neural maps that the neurobiologists are talking about. The neural map, very simply, is something which relates the mind to the body. Okay? Which it is a reflection, a mapping. A map is, for example, the relation in the brain between your hand and the intention of moving it. You see?
Just call it. Does color pictures.
Yes, exactly. What is enlightening in your,
Yeah.
you know, in technical imagery, in brain imagery. Okay. So a map is precisely the relation, the correlation between your bodily movements and let's say, logic or cognitive intention, right? So the parallel between the conatus at the level of the body and the will at the level of thought is, according to the master, the prefiguration of what neural mapping is about. It is a strict echo between the bodily and the mental. Okay? So yes, I think there is an enormous work which remains to be done in Spinoza from that point of view. This is true. I know I should do that. But you know. Oops. You want, no.
It might be a too technical of a question, take us off track because I'm not as familiar with Spinoza's work, but do you think that he has a theory of change? Because in my reading the Conatus, I don't understand why anything would change.
Yes. It's very interesting. Yeah, of course, the problem with Spinoza, which prevents me from writing on him, is that, of course, is plasticity compatible with Spinoza, because he says that everything is determined by necessity, and that the conatus is like, you know, this, I don't know.
I don't understand how we can account for things changing in the world.
That's the problem. So, as you know, Deleuze tries to, according to me, Deleuze, Spinoza and the problem of expression is one of the best. It's very, very strong. Deleuze's Ph.D. It's a masterpiece, really, because he already has in mind your question. He says, but if we read Spinoza, we have the feeling that nothing can change because everything is the expression of the necessity of substance, etc. And at the same time, he talks about the elasticity, which is very interesting for me, elasticity of the modes. So there's a kind of variability of elasticity of the conatus according to the passions. The only, it is true that there's a center, there's a kind of mobility in Spinoza at the level of affect. You know that joy is an increasing of intensity and of movement, and sorrow, on the contrary, is a reduction of that. And Deleuze says then we can compare our being, both bodily and mental, as an instrument chord, like a guitar. Sometimes it vibrates, sometimes it remains silent, and at that level you can see a changeability. Okay? But the problem is that this elasticity of the modes does not exist at the level of God. So is it possible to introduce variability, plasticity in God? That is my problem. That's why I don't write about Spinoza. Because I don't know.
Sorry.
Yes?
Is elasticity similar to Freud's elasticity?
No, because an elastic is able to go back to its initial form, rather than a plastic material is not able to go back to its originary form. For example, marble, once sculpted, cannot, come back to its initial. An elastic can be distorted, but it does not keep the imprint. Okay? It does not preserve the form. All right? But Freud also talks about plasticity, not only about elasticity, but also about plasticity of the unconscious. But anyways, you see my problem in Spinoza is that you can, I think, locate a certain changeability in the affect, and this is what Deleuze is trying to do. You remember when he says a horse, a race horse is totally different from a farm horse? It is in A Thousand Plateaus. That the affects are not the same, so a creature can be totally variable. It depends on what affects govern the body and the mind. So there can be some variability between the modes depending on their affects, depending on the possibilities open to their bodies by affect. But I'm not sure that you can introduce this changeability within at the level of God that is of necessity. So because I don't want to, I think it's too difficult for me. I wouldn't risk that. I wouldn't say that there's plasticity in Spinoza. I'm not sure. And the conatus, also something I wanted to say about that. There's a very interesting article by Yovel, Y-O-V-E-L, about the conatus. It says, we must understand the conatus not only as an endeavor to persist in life, that is as something linear. We have to understand the conatus as a way of looking for an intensification of life. So it's not only about self-preservation, like I'm preserving myself all the time, at all time. It is a way of, on the contrary, we have to think of the conatus as a search, a quest for a better life, for an improvement of life, intensification of life. So perhaps plasticity would exist also at that level, but not again at the level of substance.
Who was it that suggested that this?
Yovel. Okay? You look.
The complicated first name.
Yerushalmi.
Yao.
Yeah, it's an Israeli thing. So, you have the title of the article?
Spinoza and other heretics.
You have something on the
The
life or
conatus and the
conatus?
mutual relationship.
It's just an article, you say?
What's the title of the book again?
Spinoza and other heretics. But I'm not sure if
I
that's
have
only.
another one.
Yeah. I know, perhaps it's in the book. I said an article, perhaps it's a book chapter.
There is an essay in the book, Desire and Affect, Spinoza as a psychologist.
Yeah. I think it's a chapter of that book, Spinoza as a psychologist, yeah. Where Yovel shows that Spinoza is not only saying that I want to preserve myself, like keep endeavor in my own being, but that this persistence is at the same time quest for intensity, maximum intensity. Okay. So this perhaps would be another possibility of introducing changeability, because Yovel seems to say that some people are living more intensively than others, so you have a kind of variation, but I don't know how you can see that at the ontological level. So that's why. So you were asking me. It is true that we should have written this book with Butler about that, and this was our conflict. If you want to know everything, I said the problem is that we cannot introduce changeability at the ontological level, and she said it's not a problem. Let's talk about the finite level. Let's talk about the modes, and we don't care about the substance there. I said, no, it is not fair, because Spinoza is the thinker also of the infinite, of the necessity of God, etc. So if the problem you see is that changeability is only valid for modes, finite bodies, finite beings. So do we have the right to separate, like what Spinoza says about finitude, from what he says about God, which obviously, God obviously is not plastic. And you're right, there's no possible change at the ontological level. So that's why we didn't do it, because...
So it's respect from Spinoza.
Yeah.
Kind of
Yeah, and she said to me, but how can you do deconstruction and be so respectful about it? I said, no. It is because if I'm not sure of the validity of the concept at every ontological level, then it's not so much about deconstruction, it's about being accurate or not, you know. See what I mean?
Yeah.
Okay, so I'm not sure that you can do plasticity in Spinoza. You can do it in Hegel very easily, show that God is plastic in Hegel. It is not a problem. But for Spinoza, I'm not sure. Perhaps you can do it, but I'm not, you know? So that was the problem, to tell you the whole story.
The title of the article, I think, is Transcending Mere Survival from Conatus to
Yes.
Conatus Intelligendi.
Yeah, that's it. Transcending survival, exactly. Is it a chapter of the book you wrote?
Yeah.
Transcending survival. Yeah, that Conatus is not only survival, it's also the research of, the quest for a more intensive form of life. It's very interesting. Very good article. Very interesting. But again, this might be only valid, this is only valid at the finite level. Even if in its courses, you know, on the internet, there's this website for Deleuze's lectures at Vincennes. Deleuze seems to introduce at some point a kind of difference in God in Spinoza. He seems to introduce a kind of variability in God, one of the lectures. But I'm not sure. So.
Yeah.
You know? Okay. Anyway, I wanted really to thank you for your attention. It was very, for me, very productive, very interesting. You are very responsive, very, I wish all students were like you. So thank you for the whole thing. And if you don't have any other questions.
Thank you.
Abruptly I'm sure you're tired, so we need some fresh air. And anyway, I hope we can continue the discussion tonight.